Let's go ahead and replace our intake manifold gaskets, located right here on the bottom side of our intake. Open up your gas cap door, release and remove your gas cap, set that aside. And underneath the hood, right beside your battery, you're going to locate your fuse block. I'm going to go ahead and open up our cap here. We're going to go ahead and locate our fuel pump fuse. That is number F70, so Foxtrot 70. That should be our number 30 right here. I'm going to pull out our little fuse puller right here. Put that on there. Pull up and remove that fuse. We're simply going to set that aside for now. Put our tool back. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start the vehicle, or attempt to start it. This is part of our fuel system depressurizing. So I'm going to go ahead and try and start the vehicle. We're going to let the vehicle try and burn out any fuel or take that fuel pressure out of the fuel lines. At this point here, the vehicle is not starting, so our system should be depressurized. I'm going to go ahead and remove our key and set that aside. Using a 10mm socket, go ahead and loosen our ground terminal nut here. With that loose, go ahead and wiggle that free. Pop that off and set it aside. Let's go ahead and disconnect our air intake temp sensor here. Press it in on the tab on the bottom, pull that off, set that aside. Now we're going to use a flathead screwdriver. We're going to loosen the hose clamp on the base of our intake tube going to our throttle body. Then we're going to go to the other end of the air intake tube at the air box. Going to go ahead and loosen this. Once that's loose, we're going to remove our air intake tube. Remove this unit, go ahead and set that aside. With that off, we're now going to go ahead and remove our upper intake cover here. And this is just held on by rubber grommets and plastic posts. There's two going down on the front side and two going horizontally into the back. So lift up, pop out the front, and then pull forward and remove the cover. Now on the front side of our tensioner down here, there's going to be a 3/8 size socket hole. So we installed our 3/8 drive ratchet with our handle here. We're going to push down. That's going to release the tension on our tensioner, and we'll be able to remove our belt off of the alternator. So pressing down, grab the belt, work that up and off, and then release the tensioner. And just let that belt drop and settle right there. On the top of the alternator, there's a connector right here with a red locking tab. I'm going to press down on the tab here, wiggle this, pop that connector off. Now right on the back side of the alternator, there's a plastic cap here. We're just going to pop that cap off, and that is now going to expose this nut right here on the back side. We want to go ahead, loosen and remove that nut and remove the power cable to the back. I'm going to use my 13mm gear wrench, pop on in there, go ahead, loosen that, spin that nut off there. Be careful not to drop that. Set that aside. And then in one felt swoop, go ahead and pop that cable right off. I'm going to go ahead and tuck that in the other harness back a little bit. Our alternator is held in place by two 15mm bolts. There's one here and there's one on the other side. Let's go ahead and loosen this one here first. With that one loose, and you can spin that out by hand. Let's go ahead and grab that other one. The other bolt is right here above our idler pulley. So we're going to go ahead and get our socket popped onto that. Let's go ahead and loosen this. Reach down there and see if we can remove that by hand. It's still a little tight. Now this bolt is going to just barely clear that idler pulley. It's right on the cusp right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to come on over to the other bolt. I'm going to go ahead and loosen this one. Going to remove that bolt, set that aside. Go ahead and remove that rearward bolt with the washer. Set that aside. I'm going to use a small dead blow hammer and with a few love taps, go ahead and get this thing to move around a little bit. Go ahead and grab that alternator, wiggle it free, and we're going to try and work this up through the top. There you go. Pull it up and out. On the back side right here, we have our hose. We're going to go ahead and slide that off. Pop that off like so. And at the other end, it's attached to the air box right here. Let's go ahead and just work this off. Set that aside. On the front side here, we have two hoses. These attached to our intake. I'm going to go ahead and work these hoses off. And try our hose pliers here. And just kind of break that free a little bit. Work that up and off. Now this unit right here where the hoses go to, we're simply going to grab this here. I'm going to slide it off of this bracket, and there's a rubber bushing there. So I'm just going to gently work this unit off. Let's go ahead and disconnect our electrical connector right here. I'm going to press in on the tab on the bottom. And there's a little bit tough to pop off, so we're just going to switch over and grab a pick. We'll get a pick in there and pry up on that tab. Once that pops off, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the harness from our intake on the top right here. And pop that off like that. Now we're going to disconnect our fuel line from our fuel rail. I'm going to use a pick, and on the back side, I'm just going to gently push out, get underneath and lift up on this tab. This is going to allow us to push down, and it's going to work this locking tab out through the bottom. I'm going to get my pick underneath and try and assist with that. Push that through. Now it's unlocked. I'm going to go ahead and put a couple paper towels underneath for any residual gasoline that might dribble out of this. Now we did depressurize this here earlier. If you don't do that, you can expect some fuel spray here. There we go. And just a little bit of residual fuel coming out. And we're going to keep our towel right there to catch anything else that comes out. We're going to disconnect our electrical connectors to our fuel injectors. Now this is a V8. We have 8 injectors we're going to disconnect. We're going to disconnect the harness on the back. Now I'm going to use a small pick, and there's a red lock tab on the back side. And if I gently get underneath the edge and pull up, you can see it and hear it pop up. Once that's done, I'm going to reach down. I'm going to pinch the tab behind that red lock. Pinch and pull the harness off of the injector. I'm going to repeat this process for the other 7 cylinders. Okay, get that one. Maybe 2 more on the driver's side here to get to. All right, get that 4th one on the back over to the passenger side. I'm going to go through all 4 of these here, picking the clips. I'm going to pop my pick in there, lift up. Now that I have all 4 of those locking tabs undone, let's come on back and pinch and pull. And these back ones are buggers, they're way back. There we go. Our next step is to go ahead and try and clean off any of the debris that is on top of the engine before we unbolt and remove the intake manifold. You want to go ahead and protect your throttle body. You don't want any debris or anything to fall down inside here. I'm simply going to take an old glove, stretch it right over the top. It's going to keep anything from falling down inside. On the back side of our intake, we have this connector right here. I'm going to press down on the back, wiggle it off. On the driver's side rear of the intake manifold, there's a connector right here. We're not going to disconnect the connector, but we're going to use our trim tool here and get underneath, and it's just held on by a little plastic push pin and just setting into the back of our intake. We're just going to pop that off and separate that like that. We have this unit right here. Let's go ahead and use our trim tool. I'm going to pop this off here. Set that off to the side. Now there's a series of 8mm bolts around the perimeter of our intake. I'll go ahead and loosen and remove these. These are capture bolts, so they'll actually stay in the intake. Now the front side of the intake, in front of the throttle body, there's a bracket right here holding our AC lines. There's a single 13mm bolt holding it in place. Let's loosen and remove that. Let's go ahead and remove this nut here. Now both of these are 13mm. One is a bolt, one is a nut. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that. Get our tool out of here. And that should allow us to pull this bracket off like so. Pull that forward. Now that we're here, on the top of our throttle body, we have an electrical connector. We're going to pull back on this red lock tab on the top of it. Once we pull that back, we can now press down and remove that harness off of that. So now we have the AC lines and the electrical connector is separated. There's a wiring harness that we need to disconnect, and there's little plastic retainers here. There's one on the bracket right here. I'm just gonna pop this off right here, follow the harness back, and continue to do the same. Now the sensor right here, there's a red collar on it. That's a locking collar. Pull up on that, press on the tab, and you'll be able to pull that whole unit right off. Once this is off, what we want to do is take this harness And we're going to feed it underneath our PCV hose here. Because when we lift off the intake, this harness would have gotten caught. We would have had a bear of a time pulling this intake off as we struggled to figure out wiring. Let's get a lift up on the unit here. Last harness in the back section right here should be loose. On the back side of our intake manifold, there is a connector back here. It's pretty tough to get to, but in the middle of the connector is a red lock tab. Similar to all the other ones, we need to pull up on that lock tab and then pinch the little black tab above it and disconnect that. So I'm going to go ahead and get that disconnected, and then we'll pull off the intake. But it is now disconnected. Now I'm going to take some towels and we're going to fill our ports here. We want to prevent any sort of debris from going down inside the cylinder. So we're just going to stuff these here. And we're going to continue this process for the rest of them. Now that we have all 8 of these ports plugged, now's the time we want to go ahead and we're going to carefully remove our foam insulation block here. Go ahead and set that aside. Now's the perfect time to go ahead, grab a vacuum, clean up any sort of debris, anything that you have settled down here. Could be anything from foam nuggets to mouse poop, whatever it might be. Debris, shells from acorns. Now with our intake off, I want to go ahead and inspect our gaskets. Now each one of these ports has a gasket as well as these ports right here. Now in most cases you can go ahead and install the intake and reuse these gaskets. In our case here, our gaskets have been crushed and pretty much beyond reuse. So we went ahead and sourced another set of gaskets and we're going to go ahead and replace ours. How you do that? I'm just using a small pick. You're going to catch the edge of our road gasket and go ahead and peel that out. Now ours has some residual oil inside the track here. I'm just going to use a clean towel and pretty much go around the perimeter and clean this up. You want to try and not use any type of harsh chemicals on the plastic intake as it can deform it or cause issues. So clean out the best you can. Then you want to go ahead and take one of your new gaskets, line this up, and you're going to press that in all the way around. We're going to repeat this process for the other 7 full ports. Let's take a look at the small gasket right here. It's the same process. Get the pick in there, grab that O-ring, go ahead and pluck that out. Now if you want, you can use a pick, maybe the edge of a small trim tool or something. And I'm not going to use a sharp edge, but the back side of it, and just run my towel or rag in that groove just to try and clean out some of that residual oil that's in there. Once we have our track cleaned out, we're going to take our new gasket, line this up, work our way around the perimeter and push that in all the way. It's going to continue this process for the rest of the gaskets on the bottom of our intake. We're going to use some solvent on a paper towel here or rag. You want to go ahead and clean around the perimeter of each of these cylinders here. Make sure there's no debris, anything causing any type of potential sealing issues. Going to go ahead and continue this process for the rest of the cylinders and get this all cleaned up nice and neat. Let's go ahead and remove our towels or rags, whatever you have stuffed in these ports. I'm going to go ahead and install our intake manifold. On the intake, the back portion of it has a spot where we can install this harness. It's extremely hard to see and get to. So when I put the intake in, I want to be sure that we connect this, install our little retainer clip here into the back, and then we'll continue to push the intake back and set it down into place. I'm going to try and line this up. We're going to tip this back, slide this down at an angle. And we're going to rest the front of the intake right about there. On the back side, we're going to reach around and try and get this connector lined up. Now that we have our connector clipped in, we have that little red lock tab. We need to push that up and in to lock that in. Now you can see that the red lock tab is pushed up and into place. You can definitely feel that lock in is definitely a positive locking component there. Now there's a little plastic retainer right there. We're going to slide it over the post on the back of the intake. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and I'll show you with it installed. And there it is right there, pressed onto the little stud on the back side. Now at this point here, we're lining up our intake. Want to make sure that none of your wiring harnesses are being pinched. So you're going to walk your way around, all the way around the perimeter, check all of your harnesses. Your fuel injector connectors, make sure those are all free. Make sure that your foam pad underneath is lined up properly. So once we have our intake lined up, installed, and we did a quick inspection, we did use mirrors all the way around the perimeter, check for anything that might be causing any interference with the seating of this here, and everything is clear. So now let's go ahead and we're going to start getting some of these intake bolts started, a few threads by hand, and do this all the way around the perimeter to any of the bolts that you can reach. Just going to continue this all the way around the perimeter. Now that we have all these bolts started, let's go ahead and snug those down. Now that we have all of these bolts started, we're going to go ahead and snug them down, but we're not going to tighten them. We just want the studs or the bolts to bottom out, and then we're going to go ahead and continue with the torquing process in a particular pattern around the intake. I want to go ahead and bring those bolts down. We're going to just bottom them out to the intake. Okay, now that we have all 10 of those snugged down, let's continue with our torquing procedure. Now what we want to do is torque down our intake bolts, all 10 of them, to 9 foot-pounds. Now there's a particular pattern. We're starting on the driver's side here, and we're going to start with the third bolt back. Then we're going to cross over behind our fuel line, and we're going to come to the one right behind it. We're going to torque that one down. Now what we want to do is go to the one up front here. We're going to move forward by 1. We're going to come over here and move forward by 1. And then we're going to crisscross or cross back to the back here tighten that one down, cross over here, tighten this one, come all the way forward, tighten down our front one, tighten down our driver's side front, and then go to the driver's side rear, and then the passenger side rear. So we're gonna cross over, forward, cross over, back, cross over, all the way up, cross over to this front one, all the way back, and then cross over to that passenger side rear in that pattern. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and torque this down to 9 foot-pounds. And then our final one, way in the back here. Now, on the back side of the driver's side, we have our gray connector here. There's a little plastic Christmas tree on it. Press that into the back corner of your intake. Now we're going to go ahead and start installing our fuel injector harnesses. There's going to be 4 on this side here, and they have the little red lock tabs. So let's go ahead and line this up. Going to press this down. Make sure you press the harness on. You'll hear it click, and then press the red lock tab in, and that'll lock it on. Let's continue for the other 3 on this side. Get this one on, clip it, and then we're going to come to the front. that one lined up. You can hear it click. Press your lock tab on. Now here we have this big harness that comes through. This is for our ignition and fuel. We have our plastic pins that press into our valve cover. I want to go ahead and line these up and get these pushed into place. And then we have our last one on the front here. Our alternator harness, pull that up and over. Let me just get this lined up. And it's this unit right here. I'm just going to simply press that down. And that's it. Let's install our fuel line. Should work that in. You'll hear it click. Push up on the bottom. That'll snap into place. Now this top itself will fold over. It will simply lock into the tab on the other side. Just give that a little tug, make sure you're locked on. That looks good. Now with that connected, we have our vent tube here. This comes up and should have a little plastic retainer clip on it. That just snaps onto our crossover pipe here for our fuel. Pop that into place. And then right here has a little plastic retainer. Clip that onto the top of your intake. Do your best to clip that back on. Now, if you don't have that, you could use some sort of wire tie or something to pop that in and hold that in place. On the back passenger side of our intake, we have this connector right here. Let's go ahead and install this connector on the back here. That's going to require a little bit of pressure, so you want to go ahead and squeeze it in. You should hear it clip into place. There it is. It's locked in. And we have our passenger side bank fuel injector harness. Going to do the same as we did on the driver side. Simply line these up, press it down. You'll feel it and hear it lock in, and then press your red lock tab in. Repeat for the other three. We want to take our wiring harness here, and with our intake on, let's go ahead and it's going to route this back up underneath as it was before. Like so. Install your AC bracket on the front side of your intake. I'll line this up. The bottom of the bracket should line up with the stud down below. We're going to install our upper bolt. Once that bolt snugs down, about a quarter turn, let's go ahead and install the nut on the lower part of the bracket. Let's see if I can get my gear wrench down there. I'm going to do the same thing here. Just want to go ahead and snug this down. Once that nut is bottomed out, just snug that down. I'm going to go ahead and connect this harness tree into the AC bracket here and take our connector here, line this up, push it on, we'll clip in, and then push our red lock on. On the top side, we have this harness right here, and we have that little Christmas tree here. This is going to push into our intake. Okay, let's go ahead and bring this unit over here. Let's go ahead and slide the bracket through our rubber isolator right here. Just going to go ahead and slide the bracket through our rubber isolator and pop that into place. I'm going to go ahead and line up our connector here. Snap that on. The other side here, we have our 2 rubber hoses. Install the smaller rubber hose here, and then bring up our larger hose here. Let's go ahead and work that onto the top of the intake. I want to make sure that's fully seated. There, both hoses are fully seated. I'm going to install this tube here right on the back of our oil fill cap here. It basically pushes right into the rubber elbow. Bring this over, and this installs into our air box right here. Just press that on. There you go. Install the connector on the top of your throttle body here. It'll line right up, and then press in your red lock tab. You're going to take your alternator and feed this down and into place. And take one of the bolts here, gonna feed it through the outside section here. It really doesn't matter which side you put in first. It's just easier to get that outside one lined up, get that bolt started, just a couple threads. Then you can grab the other bolt, bring it on over, and all you gotta do is pivot the alternator until the bolt slides right on in. Once that's there, I'm gonna go ahead and try and get that bolt started a few threads. Just kind of rock that alternator around a little bit, get that popped in. You want to make sure that your harness in the back is loose, that you have availability, that you didn't pinch anything with the alternator upon installation. Everything looks stunning back here, as it should be. Let's go ahead and tighten down the 2 alternator bolts. We're just going to snug that one. Let's go ahead and get the other one here. All right, snug that down. Let's go ahead and double check the other bolt. Make sure that one is good and snug. Let's go on to the back side here. I want to go ahead and we're going to get the battery cable pressed onto the back here. Now on the back side, and we have our battery cable on the stud. Let's go ahead and install the anchoring nut. Using our 13mm gear wrench, we can go ahead and we're going to tighten this down. Would you feel that bottom out? Which right there, give it a little bit more. You just want to make sure that's on there nice and snug. Grab your electrical harness right here. You can line this up. Push this on. Once you push that on, press in on your lock tab. That'll lock that into place. On the back of the alternator, lastly, you want to go ahead and grab that little plastic cap, line that up, and we're just going to pop that back. That protects that positive live wire on the back of that alternator. Now what we can do is go ahead and line up our belt. I'm going to open up that tensioner a little bit. See if we can get that belt onto the alternator here. You want to make sure that your belt is on all of the pulleys as they should be. Once you get that put on, go ahead and slowly release. And our belt is off of our idler pulley a little bit up top, so we're just going to release some tension. There we go. At this point here, you want to use your light. You want to look down and check all of your pulleys, make sure the belt is routed properly and is fully seated on all of the ribs on every pulley, and everything looks good. On the back side of our engine cover here, there's going to be 2 pegs or pins that line up in the bushings on the back side. Press that down. You're going to have your oil cap line up perfectly through the hole over here on the right side. And this will be nice and stationary. Next, let's go ahead, locate your sensor here. And we're going to remove our throttle body inlet protector right here. Install your air intake tube. Pop that onto the throttle body and the other end onto your air box here. Once we have both of those installed, let's go ahead and tighten the screw on our band clamp here, or our hose clamp. And we'll just kind of lightly snug that down. Go ahead and tighten up the one to your air box. Once these are both snug, let's come on back to our sensor right here. Grab your connector, line that up, simply clip that on. Let's go ahead and open up our fuse box. Grab our 30 amp fuse that we had removed and reinstall that. Now, if you're not too sure or remember where it goes, simply go back up here, locate your F70 fuel pump. You can locate it right here. There's F70 right here, and we have the F71 below it, and there's a C82. So this unit right here is our C82. We have the F71, and the 30 is our F70. Once that's all set, close up your fuse box, make sure that's nice and secure. Now we can go ahead and install our gas cap. Go ahead and grab your ground terminal here for your battery. Going to connect this here. Make sure that's down that post pretty good. Let's go ahead and snug down that ground here. You're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.